Welcome to another installment of The Other Guys. It's not about the LS, the Coyote, or even a small block or big block. It's about the motors nobody wants. Today we're taking a look at a possibly feeble, definitely forgotten, potentially fast forward. I give to you for your viewing pleasure, the 400M. In this video, I took a 400M. Before you start laughing, I even rebuilt this thing. I wanted the 400M to be the very best that it could be. And I know some of you are thinking, hey, that's a terrible motor. It's neither a small block and it's not a big block. It's in that gray area between, and it never made any power, and it's a terrible choice. Sure, that's one way to look at it. I'll tell you how I look at it. If you had a 351 Cleveland and you bored and stroked it to 400 inches with Cleveland head flow, that's a serious piece. Well, that's exactly what a 400M is. Sure, it's a tall deck and it's harder to find intake manifolds for it, but a 351 Cleveland head bolts right on. In fact, they come with a 2V head. If you upgrade to a 4V head, put a good cam in it, and find the right intake manifold, it's a serious piece. It's a 400-inch stroker 351 Cleveland, and that's nothing but awesome. And guess what, for you D-stroke guys, the 400M comes in a short stroke 351 version, so you can rev it to the moon. Of course, you can't do any of that, but I did take a 400M and subject it to a ton of different modifications. We put aluminum heads in it. I tried a couple of different camshafts. We tried different intake manifolds, and I made a motor that actually made quite a bit of power, especially for a 400M. We started mild, ended up with wild. So let's take a look. Before we take a look at our other guy, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. Come on, these things don't happen by themselves. Push a couple of buttons down there, ring that bell, do all that stuff, go tell some friends. I'm gonna do a lot of other guys. Make sure you make some comments. Let me know your suggestions. I wanna do the 8.1 liter big block. I wanna do maybe an SHO Taurus motor. I'm definitely gonna do the big bang on a small block Chevy. Got a lot of stuff coming, so hey, push those buttons. Okay, we're gonna take a look once again at the other guys, and this time we're going all in on a 400M. And remember, it's not a 400M, it is a tall deck stroker Cleveland. And on this one, I actually did go all in. It's not something I just went and got from the rec yard and started running. I actually put a lot of effort into this, yes, on a 400M. So I actually rebuilt this thing. I even put flat top pistons in it. And the pistons we used were not designed for a 400M. They're actually designed for a Cleveland. But since the compression height is close between those two, it actually worked out. And on the factory 400Ms, the piston is way down in the hole anyways. And when we put ours in, it was still down about 60, even though it was a flat top piston. But it did raise the compression. It brought it up somewhere in the 9-to-1 range with a factory head. So we put this thing together first with that piston upgrade. It was a forged piston. It had valve release, which allowed us to run lots of camshaft because we wanted to put some camshaft in this thing. So it allowed us to run that and make the upgrades. But the first thing I did was put it basically back into stock configuration. So we put the stock camshaft back in it, the stock stamped steel rockers, the stock cylinder heads, even the stock intake manifold with a stock 2-barrel carburetor. Now I didn't have an actual stock 2-barrel carburetor from the 400M, but we did have a 2-barrel Holley, which would satisfy most people. So we equipped with that combination our stock 400M. I just want to make sure. I want to check and make sure and see if we ran this thing. I think we did run this thing with headers. Yeah, we ran it with 1 7/8 Hooker Super Comp headers for a Mustang chassis. So with the 2-barrel carburetor induction system, stock cam, stock heads and everything, and our flat top pistons, our 400M produced 265 horsepower. That's right, a whopping 265 at 4,100 RPM, really revving it out there, and 412 foot-pounds of torque. So the first thing I did, we wanted to do one at least mild upgrade because we went kind of crazy with the thing. So we put a Y-end 4-barrel intake manifold on, and we ran a 750 Holley carburetor on it. So the 4-barrel intake picked things up quite a bit, pushed it up to near 300 horsepower, 397 horsepower. Pushed the torque peak out a little bit, didn't improve it dramatically, but 421 foot-pounds of torque, which was good. Now, if you wanted to take this thing even further, what I would recommend is you could probably mill the factory 2V heads, even do a little porting on them. You could stick a mild camshaft, like an RV type camshaft in this thing, and you would have a good little combination with headers and a 4-barrel and a mild cam. This thing probably would get up close to 350 horsepower and torque would probably be pushed up as well. So that would be a good little combination for a 400M in a full-size truck or, ranchero or that kind of thing, and it would work good. We didn't go that route. We went all in, so let's find out what we did. After establishing the baseline with our 400M with the forged pistons and then the 4-barrel wind intake manifold and carburetor, we decided we were going to go crazy with it. So what we did was I installed a set of ProComp aluminum heads because they have a set of 4V aluminum heads. And the thing I like about those heads is that the port volume on those is smaller than a factory 4V head. So not only do they flow a ton more than a factory 4V Cleveland head, they also have smaller ports, both of which I like. Now we had Bryce from Dr. J's port these out, and so they flowed like 325 or 330 CFM. They flowed enough to support a lot of power, even way more than we were making. The other thing that I did was we put a solid roller camshaft in this, not necessarily because we wanted it to be a racy combination, but that's what was available. Otherwise, we would have had to have kind of a custom cam done. But the guys from Crowder supplied a street roller, so it was more streetable. And I'll go ahead and put the specs up here. You can see what that cam was. It was the milder of the two that we tried, because we also stepped up and ran a cam from the guys from MPG who are really good with this Ford stuff. So we put that camshaft in, solid roller lifters. Obviously, we had to change the push rods. We put our ported aluminum heads in. And the other thing that we did is because there's a limited number of manifolds available for these, we wanted to try some of the Cleveland manifolds. But in order to run the Cleveland manifolds, which are designed for a different deck height, not the 400M, we had to have spacers. And again, the guys from MPG came to the rescue and made spacers that allowed us to run a standard 351 Cleveland intake manifold, which there are a lot of them available for that, on our 400M. So the first one we did was an RPM air gap from Edelbrock, which is always a good intake manifold. But here's a photo of what I had to do to make this thing fit. I basically had to just destroy the manifold to make all of this work. But it was worth it in the end, and the intake worked well. It made good power. But let's take a look and see what happened when we installed the cylinder heads, the camshaft, and that RPM air gap intake manifold all in one shot. Big changes in power. The power output jumped to 489 horsepower. Torque was way up to 502 foot-pounds of torque. That's really good power. Lots of head flow, more camshaft. Obviously, we moved peak power out farther in the RPM range. All of that stuff's good, but I wasn't done there. After I did this, what I did was install a single plane intake that was actually designed for this, the 400M deck height. So it was actually a 400M intake manifold, and it was designed by the guys at CHI Heads. And if you're familiar back in the day, these guys working with John Causey, they make really good cylinder heads and they make really good intake manifolds. And I happened to get a hold of one of these, and it was designed for this 400M. So we installed that single plane intake manifold, and it was also designed for a Dominator style carburetor. So we installed that single plane intake and the big carburetor, traded power down low, as single planes always do compared to dual planes, picked up a bunch of power at the top. So equipped with that intake manifold, the power output of our 400M, remember we're talking about, or should I say our tall deck stroker Cleveland, produced 529 horsepower. Peak torque was about the same at 506 foot-pounds. The peak just happened later in the RPM range. Now let's take a look and see what happened when I installed even more camshaft. Our final group of testing, because we ran a ton of stuff on this 400M. You'll remember this is our stock motor with the 4-barrel on it. And then we installed the ProComp heads and the dual plane intake on it with the Crowder solid roller street roller. And then we installed the single plane intake after installing the dual plane. So that's where we were. What I want to show you now is I'm going to get rid of the single plane. Here's what happened when we installed the even hotter roller cam from the guys at MPG. And we'll compare both the dual plane versus the dual plane and the single plane versus the single plane, because I ran both of those intakes also with this camshaft. So here's what happened when we installed the MPG camshaft. And as you can see, lots of lift, more duration. It's basically a hotter cam, but those guys really know what they're doing, especially with these Clevelands. So here's the power gain from the camshaft and run with the same RPM air gap and the adapters for the intake manifold. So the power output with that combination jumped up to 528 or 29, 528 horsepower. Peak torque was up to 525 foot-pounds. As you can see, that camshaft, even though it was quite a bit wilder than the street profile, the Crowder one that we had run, which I liked, it basically made more power everywhere from 3,000 RPM all the way up to 6,500 RPM. So it was a good combination. And remember, this 400M originally started out, it was factory rated at less than 175 horsepower. It made peak torque at lower than 3,500 RPM. I mean, peak horsepower at less than 3,500 RPM, and made peak torque at 2,000 RPM. So you can see how far we've come. It's a long way. So now I want to show you what happened. Let's get rid of our two dual plane combinations. And this is our single plane with the Crowder street roller and the single plane intake from CHI. So here's what happened after we installed the camshaft from MPG with the single plane intake and that same Dominator carburetor. Again, just like with the dual plane, the MPG cam made more power everywhere, even though it was quite a bit, bigger and more aggressive. But equipped with that camshaft, our 400M produced 568 horsepower and 542 foot-pounds of torque. Again, a 400M or a tall deck stroker Cleveland. This is a good combination, and you could actually probably make this kind of power with a flat tappet cam or a hydraulic roller, because we're only talking about a motor that makes peak power at 62 or 63 or 61 or 6100 RPM. We're not revving it very high, and there's good reason for that, because this still had factory rods in it. They're really long, and not very many people make aftermarket rods for that combination. I would also like to get the piston up to zero deck, because right now this was about 60 or 70 down in the hole, which again is not good for, it makes them detonation prone and stuff, and it's just not a good situation. You want that thing to be at or near zero deck. And if I had more time and we sourced the things out, we could have done that. But 568 horsepower, 542 foot-pounds, all from a 400M. And I know that there's a lot left in this combination if we would have spent more time with it and actually had a reasonable compression that was above 9 to 1. So there we go. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what did you think of our other guy 400M? Personally, I really like it. Like I said before, I think the 400M gets a bad rap. I mean, sure, it has a really tall deck, so you have to have these giant long push rods and connecting rods and all that stuff. It has problems associated with it. It was never very popular. But again, I look at it as a 400-inch tall deck stroker Cleveland motor. I mean, the ported aluminum heads that we put on it work very well. They flow very well. So you can make a ton of power. You can make way more than we made because we didn't have a lot of compression in this thing. You can put lots of camshafts in. You can put a big roller camshaft in it and really think about it. Forget about the tall deck and forget about the negative connotation of it being a 400M. If you had a 400-inch motor with Cleveland heads on it and you had lots of compression and you had a big roller cam, you could make some serious power. And guess what? They'll also take boost. I don't know who you're going to get to make special connecting rods for it, but you definitely could. Even the stock stuff, we've run boost on these things. We've run centrifugal superchargers on them, and they work pretty well, just like everything else. So the 400M can make power. You just got to put the right stuff on it. And I can't believe that I cut out that intake manifold to make it fit. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Thanks for watching, guys. Again, make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I'll keep testing. More other guy stuff coming up.